Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Pathfinder Report. My name is Ethan Harper, and I'll be running point as your host today. Today, here in the studio with me is Joel Gruey and Glenn Birch once again. Today, we are going to be talking about the 2026 State of the Union. I almost said 2024. Wow, that would have been embarrassing. So welcome to the studio, you two. Welcome back. It's episode 2 of the Pathfinder Report. If I am correct, our resident State of the Union expert is Mr. Glenn. So would you please tell us what the State of the Union is and why is it a thing? Why does the president do this?
Yeah, so the State of the Union, it hasn't always been called the State of the Union, but
Really?
it has always happened in some way.
Mm.
It actually comes out from the Constitution itself. In Article 2, Section 3, it says that the president will, from time to time, give a report to Congress on the State of the Union and to basically provide proposals, policies, and stuff for them to consider. And so ever since George Washington was president, you had the State of the Union, or at that time it was called the annual address or annual message. And the president would give this message to Congress. Both Washington and Adams did it in person. Neat history thing, back at that point, it was actually done in the Senate chamber, not the House chamber. But this was before they even had Washington, D.C. as the capital. But Washington and Adams both gave the annual message in person. And then Thomas Jefferson didn't like doing that. His official reason for it was that it was too monarchical. It was too much like the speech from the throne that the king gives in the United Kingdom to this open their parliament. So the Jefferson said that. Historians think it was actually because he was a pretty lousy public speaker. Um, and his inaugural address was an epic failure in public opinion at that point. So he changed from going and giving it as a speech in person to instead sending a message as a written message to Congress and having the clerks read it out in the House and the Senate for him. Um, After Jefferson did that, it actually stood that way until 1913, I think it was, when Woodrow Wilson returned to giving it in person as a speech. And since then, just about every president has done that on an almost annual basis of going to Congress. It used to be much more just here's the basics of what we have done in the executive branch, and here's policy and legislation I want you to consider. Into now, with the advent of radio and television, everybody can watch it. And so it's more than just speaking to Congress. It's become addressed to the entire nation as a whole, which, Ethan, to your point, part of why it's hard to stay awake for those of us on the East Coast, it now starts at 9 o'clock. It used to start earlier, but it started in 1965. They moved it to be in prime time. So 9 o'clock on the East Coast. So it wasn't during the workday for those on the West Coast. Um, so it's late, and the speeches have just been getting longer and longer. So it goes really late at night.
Okay, so I have a question on that. My understanding is that speaking of length, this last one set a record. Is that correct?
That's correct. This was the longest State of the Union in U.S. history.
And do you know how long it actually was? I heard it was well over an hour. But
yeah,
it wasn't
was right around an hour and 50 minutes, I think. I don't remember the exact time.
Now, does that count applause, or is that just the speaking time? Because I know that sometimes they do that differently.
It does count the applause and stuff.
Still, that's a long speech.
It was a very long speech. It was shorter than what it was being previewed as being at least 2 hours. Oh. And then apparently the White House realized that going for 2 hours starting at 9 o'clock on the East Coast wasn't the best. And so they rapidly cut stuff at the end to get it to try to end before 11 o'clock.
All right. Now, so I'm a bit of a nerd on this, and just reading the news and watching some of the different stuff, it looks like, Glenn, that there were multiple firsts or record breaks or different things that happened that had not been done before. or were particularly uncommon in the State of the Union versus historic ones. Can you kind of pick a couple of the highlights there, or the notables, maybe?
Yeah. So one of the things that he's did that's been different that I don't remember ever seeing a State of the Union or hearing it happen before was it's been common for the president to have guests at the State of the Union and then to reference them in his speech and to call them out. That goes back to Ronald Reagan started that tradition of recognizing the guests that he was bringing in, telling story about them, and then having them stand in the gallery. But Tuesday night for the State of the Union, President Trump actually had at different points people out kind of in the halls waiting for him to to mention them and bring them up, and then they kind of walked in as kind of surprise guests. Um, the biggest storyline for that one was probably the men's Olympic hockey team, who came in and they had them come in up into the press gallery when he started talking about them. And so they all walked in wearing their USA sweaters and their gold medals from having won the Olympics this year. Um, and so there was that one. There was also, and of course, now that I'm kind of being put on the spot, I'm forgetting the exact story, but there was a guy who had been abducted in, I think it was in Venezuela, and he got freed after everything that happened in Maduro with Maduro and stuff, and was freed more recently. Um, and I think it was his niece, was there as one of Trump's guests, and he brought out like saying tell him the story about this guy, told her like not only is he alive but he's here tonight, and had him come in through the doors there and had the surprise reunion there, which was really cool to watch. But also something that I've never seen happen during the State of the Union. It felt a little bit more reality TV than State of the Union normally is. But it was pretty cool to see that actually happen right there.
Well, Trump's had a long history in doing reality TV, so this is probably not uncommon turf for him.
You
He
could
does
very much see his background as an entertainer coming out in the State of the Union, and the way that he did some of the stuff there Tuesday night. That was very different from how the more traditional politician president has done stuff.
Well,
Right.
he was elected to be different than what they'd had before. We've definitely seen that. Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, now, okay, just as a trivia thing, I know you probably saw the pictures running around of the somewhat toothless smile of our U.S. hockey team, of one of the guys being rather excited. He mentioned at the end of that, when he got his gold medal, he was heading back to get his teeth fixed, among other things. Were those fixed yet, or did they get that close in the camera shot? Did you notice?
I did not pay that close attention to that.
Fair enough. Fair enough. It just made that picture has managed to make the rounds and the rounds. I mean, both teams having quite the dramatic, men's and women's having the dramatic win. Canada seemed less than pleased.
Yeah.
One might imagine.
Yeah. Both
It's
of them
kind of
winning
funny.
in overtime was very proud for me as an American. I was a little annoyed with the timing of the men's game because it was the same time as I was at church. So I didn't actually get to watch the men's win it live, but did watch the women's hockey, and seeing both of our hockey teams win gold was, as someone who grew up a fan of hockey, I was very proud to watch that.
It's kind of funny how we were talking in current events. We were talking in current events chat last week. Plug for current events chat. You should totally come check it out. You can find the information on projectpathfinder.net. But we were talking about the role of athletes in politics, because a lot of the kids were like, well, if you're out there representing your country in the Olympics, are you not also allowed to exercise your right to express your opinion? Should you support the current political structure? Like, how supportive can you agree with what's going on in your country, but also represent it? And so those were some interesting questions. And I think I personally, and it's not quite on topic with what we have going tonight, but I personally want to try and set aside some time to go and see if I can find interviews from the hockey players and see what that all looked like. So, but that's really cool.
I'm in my way, because I've been wanting to do the same thing, and I've been about as busy as you are. But that'll be fast.
Yeah.
That's it. Back to the State of the Union, if we can, because
Yeah. So the
there was a
active
few
state
other
of
activities that happened there.
Yeah, well, or rather lack thereof. The word on the street, Glenn, is that there were several people who did not elect to stand and applaud when certain things were announced or certain things were said at the appropriate times to stand and applaud. They neglected, or they elected to not. Um, would you be able to speak? I know you probably wouldn't be able to speak into the mind of every single one of those people because you are not psychic or clairvoyant. But do you think you could hypothesize as to why, and then maybe go into why it's important?
And maybe a bit of like what happened if, for the people that weren't actually following that particular event.
Yeah, that
A
would
little bit
be.
of the backstory there.
Yeah.
So I will say the what happened is going to be a little bit more complicated because this happened at numerous points through the State of the Union. Um, but it is, we did see, and we've seen this in most State of the Unions, where the president's party gets up and applauds at all the different policy proposals. The president will talk about things that he and his administration has done, or talk about things that they have gotten through Congress, or stuff they want Congress to do. And the president's party is always standing and applauding for those things. And often the opposition party is not, because they disagree with that. And that was very much the case here on Tuesday night, where there were some places where traditionally it would still be a bipartisan applause line, um, where there wasn't this year. The one that really stood out to me, and I haven't actually gone through to fact check this to make sure that I'm not missing anything, but as far as I remember, when the president gets to the line, and it's always in the State of the Union, something along the lines of "the state of our union is strong," and the president will always deliver that at some point during the speech. And normally that is actually a bipartisan applause line. Even if you disagree with everything the president's been doing, you will stand and applaud at that point of "the state of our union is strong." And that was not the case Tuesday night. It was Republicans were standing for that one, and the Democrats were kind of stayed seated at that point. Um, and so that one was the surprise to me. There were numerous points throughout it where you could tell President Trump was going for the response of Republicans are going to stand for this and the Democrats aren't, and I'm going to use this for political means. And so you saw
Now,
that a lot through it, of bringing up specific policies or specific things. At one point, he basically, and I should have written this down because I knew I wouldn't be able to quote it directly, but he basically gave a challenge of everyone stand if you agree with this statement, and then went along the lines of their their job is to defend American citizens over illegal immigrants. Um, at which point the Republicans stood for that, and the Democrats stayed seated because they knew kind of some of the political side of motivation behind that. Um, and so there were a couple points there where it was very stark of the Democrats showing their disapproval and their disagreement with the president by staying seated and not by yelling at him, although that did happen at times. And it's become, I remember back when President Obama was in office, Representative Joe Wilson from South Carolina yelled, "You lie," at one point during one of his State of the Union addresses. And that was like massive because members of Congress don't yell to interrupt the president's speech. And that's happened a lot more over the course of President Trump and President Biden's addresses there. But for the most part, it was more the stay seated to show we disagree with this, um, than actually yelling and disrupting the speech.
yeah, that definitely seemed to be, and I'm sure that was expected on the White House's part, where they were the president and his team was like, we're going to put something in here that's going to, and the way I've heard it described is that it's setting up a pin,
Yep.
a political pin for the Democrats, because they've been more favorable to basically to kind of immigrants or illegal aliens, whatever, however you want to do the terminology, philosophically, and I think Trump set them up to basically say, stand if you think that the first purpose of government is something to the effect of defending American citizens versus illegal immigrants. And it's one of those, either you stand and you're with the president, which politically for the Democrats is not going to play well, or you don't stand and you're contrary to law and order. Is where it's a political pit. I'm sure it will be set up to be used in the elections coming up in November. In a variety
there's
of
already an ad out.
I'm sure. I'm surprised it's actually.
I forget which one, but there's a super PAC that already has that ad out.
It's like they were waiting for it.
Yep.
That said, there was another response that was engaged by at least some of the lawmakers, and that was to just not come. And there was almost 90, I think 80 something, 86, 87,
Whoa.
I don't remember the exact number. Democrats did not attend the State of the Union.
I hadn't heard about that one. That's crazy.
That seemed to be a higher number than normal. Obviously, there's always some that don't attend, right? For one reason or the other. And sometimes it's practical stuff like flights and travel logistics. But most people, it's a big deal. You're coming, you're bringing your guests, everybody gets a certain number of tickets, that sort of thing. Also, I think I figured out why the White House had to keep dragging people in and out. Apparently, they only get 24 tickets.
Yep.
Not counting the formal seating at the front. They only get 24. And the number of guests, just the Olympic team alone checks up a large number of those. So you're going to have to rotate people in and out for that reason. But what do you think, just thinking in terms of political strategy, there's the stand, not stand, or don't come. And I think the Democrats at least expected something like this, maybe not that specifically. I think that still caught some of them off guard. But I think they knew there was going to be some political shots being taken here. So let's just play it out for a minute. If you're on the opposite side of the president and you know that sort of situation is going to be coming in, do you go and put yourself in that position, or do you just not go and say State of the Union is not that important? Like, how do you navigate that one, or what are the considerations that need to be navigated, as it were?
Yeah, that's historically, you always had some, or almost always had some members who, for one reason or another, couldn't attend. Very rarely was it I am boycotting and not going. It was the I can't, or after the September 11th terrorist attacks, when Congress started adding their own designated survivors, people that were asked to not come in case an attack happened on the Capitol at that point. But it wasn't I'm boycotting this. That's a much newer realm. And for me personally, if I'm a member of Congress, I'm showing up to the State of the Union. Whether the president is one of my party and I like him or her and I voted for him or her, or if I don't like the president and the presidents of the other party, I'm showing up because in my mind, the State of the Union is an important civic event, which is why, even though it's 9 o'clock and goes well past my bedtime, I stay up and watch the State of the Union every year. But
I'm appreciative of it.
I've got some numbers. That's a lot of people. Joel, how many did you say that you thought were not there?
It was I think almost 90, give or take.
No.
Was it higher than that?
This is saying that I've got, and it's granted, it's only one news source. Need to find some corroborating information, but it says that around 20, it says that the newspaper counted 20 Senate Democrats and just under 110 House Democrats missing. So somewhere around 130 people. And I also did some research. There's no established historical average no-show rate of the State of the Union, as typically and attendance is always under, like Glenn, like you guys were saying earlier, it's like things happen, people aren't able to show up, but typically it's a big deal. State of the Union is a big deal. You show up if you can. But then, this year was historically high.
Sorry, I'm checking my notes now, and I realized what I was seeing was how many had forecasted they weren't coming. That's how many publicly said in advance, and then even more did not.
And then even more did not. Okay. All right, cool.
Out of time.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else of note for the State of the Union, though?
on that, one thing that was new this year, and I didn't watch it because it was going on at the same time, but a bunch of the Democrats, not only did they boycott it, which, again, historically not common, much more common under President Trump, of Democrats boycotting the State of the Union. This wasn't the first year that's happened,
Hmm.
but there were actually a handful of them that did their basically counter State of the Union programming. And so at the same time, they were down the mall in some other place having their counter, I think they called it the People's State of the Union. Um, but they had their own thing where they were going there as not just are they boycotting it, but they were going and trying to give their own presentation on the State of the Union from their view.
But doesn't Governor Spanberger from Virginia, doesn't she do a Democrat? Didn't
Oh
she
yeah,
do the Democrat
she
response to
did
the
the
State of the
official
Union?
response, um, which is like that's the party out of power always
They
has
always do
someone
that.
give a response, but this year they were trying to do that as
So this
I
was
don't
on
know.
top of that.
Yeah, it was on top of that. It was during the time of the actual speech and
Ah,
everything,
okay.
um, which means I don't think it got a lot of coverage because all the news networks and any nerd or person actually interested in it was watching the State of the Union, not that. But that was one of the things that did stand out to me as a difference this year that I don't remember seeing members of the opposite party not just boycotting the State of the Union, but trying to host their own thing and give a counter narrative during the State of the Union.
I don't think I've ever heard of that either. All right. That was a lot. We had a lot of content. Anything else you want to talk about with
Mhm.
State of the Union, or should we move on?
No, I think it's just it is interesting to me as somebody who through our as the two of you are well aware, someone who has been through a journalism course training
Program.
exercise.
There we
Yeah,
go.
program. Journalism program. Spinning the narrative is incredibly important, and the timing with which you spin a narrative is astronomically important in the launch that your platform, your your idea, whatever it is, the launch that it gets. Timing is everything, and then spinning it the correct way at the right time. You can say something terribly at the right time and still get a good result. It
Or the reverse.
or the
Say it really
reverse.
well at the wrong time, and it still doesn't
Absolutely.
work.
Oh yeah. So it just kind of boggles my mind that they would choose to do it at the same exact time for any reason other than look at us, we don't like it so much that we're throwing our own party. Like it sounds like high school level drama almost. Like, fine, we didn't get invited to the football team's party, so we're going to go throw our own party down the street and we have
Except that they had
pizza.
invitations. Yes.
Yeah. Moving on from the State of the Union, which I find this, I don't know, you can read into the State of the Union being so unusual also on the 250th birthday of America. But there's something else going on this year that's kind of twined in with the 250th birthday of America, and it's not so much related to current events government as it is to current events Pathfinder. So for those of you listening at home, we're going to kind of change tracks and go into Glenn's favorite thing. We've done two. This is like a Glenn special tonight. He loves talking about the structure of government, and he loves talking about what we're about to talk about next, which is iAdvocate, but not just iAdvocate Westminster. Mr. Glenn, would you please enlighten the folks at home what iAdvocate Westminster is? And if you're listening, you should really watch this interview so you can see the smile on his face. The guy is practically glowing. He's like, yes, let me talk about it.
I love this. And before I even get into it, I want to say I love this because the looks that I first got when I said this is what we should do or have as part of our America's 250th anniversary. The looks at first were, what? Because iAdvocate Westminster is our United Kingdom Parliament simulation. Um, and we talked about America's 250, and I'm like, this would be great for us to do as a 250th. And at first, everyone looked at me and goes, Glenn, you're crazy. We're talking America's 250th. Um, Doing the country we overthrew isn't necessarily the best way to just celebrate like the 250th anniversary. But for me, I love the comparative politics side of looking at our governmental structure versus other structures. And I love looking at the Westminster system, especially because that is the system our founding fathers came out of. And so
Right.
when you look at the Westminster system, that is what the founding fathers knew at the time. And they looked at that and they said, okay, we'll keep some aspects of it. And so you do our iAdvocate's Westminster simulation and you do our iAdvocate or you come to camp, you'll see some areas where there's commonalities between them. There's two houses in Parliament, two houses in Congress, but there's also some major differences. Um, for example, in the Westminster system, it is all combined together. The executive branch is led by the Prime Minister, who is a member of Parliament. All of the cabinet ministers are in Parliament. There is no separation of powers there. And even until I think it was the 1990s, the House of Lords was the Supreme Court for the United Kingdom. There was no separation of powers, no judicial, legislative, executive branch distinctions, no checks and balances. And our founding fathers came out of that going, whew, we see problems. We can fix this. We're creating our own government. Let's do this. And so, did they do it perfectly? Of course not. But our founding fathers came out and said, here are problems. The other system in the world was like tyranny, dictator, monarchy, also problems. So, let's, instead of going with a combined government that has executive, legislative, and judicial functions all together in one, let's separate them into three different branches. And you have three co-equal branches. You've got the Congress, you've got the as a legislative branch making the laws. You've got the executive branch enforcing the laws and carrying them out, and the judicial branch that is actually doing justice. They're finding guilt or innocence. They're making sure that the branches are staying within their realm, that the Constitution is being followed, and you've got this checks and balances, separation of powers that is such a core to the US governmental system. That was something that in a lot of ways they came up with because the system that they knew didn't have that. And so I'm excited for us to be doing iAdvocate Westminster, so that way students can kind of see, one, there's some really fun stuff in the way that the Westminster system works, but they can
Mhm.
also see the brilliance of our founding fathers to go, no, instead of having this all in one thing, let's separate it out. Let's have checks and balances, three equal branches that are going to be distinct, that can check each other, that can make sure that what is happening and what the government is doing is actually in the best interest of the people. And it's a difference that our system has. It does mean it's slower, it's more cumbersome, it's more difficult to do stuff.
Mm.
But the
Yes.
founding fathers said that's better than having one system where it is all the same thing and they can do whatever they want. If they've got a majority in parliament, that means the prime minister can do whatever the heck he or she wants. That's not the best way to do government in
Right.
their founding fathers' minds. And as much as I love the parliamentary system and watching it, I agree with them. That's not, in my opinion, the best way to do government. And our founding fathers were able to pull out and come up with a genius design for government coming out of that Westminster system.
Right. So I've got a question for the two of you because the two of you have seen Westminster run several times. If I'm not mistaken, there is a picture somewhere of you sitting in a certain chair up in Canada holding a
Yes.
very big stick. There's, you guys have
It's
seen
called
this
a mace.
happen.
Let's be
Uh,
specific.
Excuse me, Mace. My apologies. My apologies. In your opinion, does a student glean more about these systems by doing Westminster first and then another simulation like iAdvocate or Camp? Or do you think they gain more if they do Camp slash iAdvocate and then do Westminster?
Well, my gut is it doesn't matter. I think you can learn a lot either way. You can either do and learn, okay, this is a system. Now, Westminster is a more modern than what it was than
Right,
necessarily going
right,
all the way back to
right,
the
right,
1700s.
right.
But you can go Westminster, learn that system, and then go. And hopefully, as an American, you already have a base understanding of government, three branches, House and
Hmm.
Senate in the
Hmm.
legislative branch, like that level of stuff. And so you know enough that you can look at the Westminster system, go, this isn't ours, and then you can go and dive deeper into that and see all the differences. Whereas if you do Camp or an iAdvocate first and you're doing that American system first, you've got that deeper understanding of how the American system works, and then you can go and do Westminster and understand, oh, I see why the House and Senate have their rules set up like this instead of like that. But I think either way you do it, you're going to be able to see that how the American system works, how the Westminster system works, and whichever one you do first, I think you're going to come away with an appreciation for our founding fathers and the system that they created for our government.
The only thing I'd add to that is that if you do one, you need to do the other. And the only reason I would say that is because I think understanding, like experiencing both of them, will give you the contrast in a way that I think engages you, like a multi-sensory way of learning that.
Hmm.
As a practical example, in Westminster, you don't have a vote; you are the vote. Is kind of the easy way to describe that. And so it means that when voting is called, you physically get up and run around, which is a little chaotic, as opposed to just raising your hand or saying yes or no, whatever. There's a like the vote is called, then you have to get in these rooms in a certain amount of time, and they lock the doors. There's a bunch of stuff that happens, and it's very dramatic. That's We went for a slightly more organized and less like physical running around version of it when we built our system. That is one of the more visually dramatic differences. Definitely not one of the more substantive ones, but visually much more dramatic. If you want some
Hmm.
exercise, definitely go for Westminster. You're going to get a lot more legwork in there than you will in our traditional American form of government, which, well, I will refrain further commentary culturally on
Yeah.
that. But that being
Yeah.
said, okay.
I don't know. I got a pretty good workout running bills back and forth to the White House when I did Camp. So, I
Sure,
mean, it
because in
was.
this case, everybody has to run every time you vote, or at least they can. So and there's usually a couple kids that are like, I like this part of the thing, and we're going to make this happen over and over and over. And it is fun. It is fun. And you see some of that, but it also gives you an idea of like the personal responsibility comes with being the representative of someone. Like you are, in fact, their vote, or you are, in fact, a vote, not just that you have some sort of authority. It's like you actually embody things. So there's you see some of the goods and bads in each of the systems, and there's some stuff that you'll look at Westminster and go, oh, I like that. I really like that. And you look at some stuff in our system, you're like, oh, but I really like this over here. So again, I think the order doesn't matter. If you want to go historical accuracy, go Westminster, then go with the U.S. system. You'll see what came from where. But either way, you're going to learn a lot from it. And for the 250th, we are really pleased. We're actually bringing this program out across the U.S. in 3 different places. We can't really talk about the third, but we can at least talk about 2 of them. So if you're going to be in the area, you'll actually get a chance to attend. That'll be coming up soon. So that
Ooh,
being said,
segue
I know
two.
we're running out of
Segue
time, and
two.
I don't
My
want to
next
monologue too long.
question: Where is Westminster going to be this year? And then I'm sure anybody who's paying attention to the socials will find out where Westminster 3 will be if it happens. So, where is Westminster going first in 2026?
I'll start by saying there can also be a Westminster 4, 5, or 6. So if you're interested in Westminster and we're not going to be in your area, reach out to us. We'd love to bring this or our other programs to you.
Oh yeah. Oh
But
yeah.
I Advocate Westminster, the first one is coming up in Massachusetts. We'll be up at the Mass Hope Convention the end of April. I am now drawing a blank on the exact dates, but I think it's the last weekend in April. So
Cool.
while Joel goes into what the second one's going to be, I'm going to confirm those dates to make sure I gave the right information.
Well, the second one is going to be Florida. We are pleased to be attending and providing the program for the Florida Parent Educator Association, FPEA, the homeschool convention there. It is the largest homeschool convention in the world. And we are really pleased to be able to be bringing our iAdvocate Westminster there. So we're going to be doing one up in Massachusetts, one down in Florida in the Orlando area. Although that might be a little more accessible to people because people come from all over the world for that one. So that being said,
Yeah.
if you're coming down, we'd love to see you there.
And again, like Glenn said, if you want Pathfinder to come to a location or convention near you, just reach out. There's literally an area on the Pathfinder website where you can go and schedule a meeting with Alyssa, who is kind of the coordinator for all that. And you can schedule a meeting, talk about details. So send a link if you're just watching this, but you know somebody who runs one of those events, and you're like, oh, Pathfinder would be great there. Send them the link to that and just say, hey, these people are great and they're at least worth talking to. I'm super excited to hear the stories. I, unfortunately, will probably not be going, but I look forward to hearing all about it. And Glenn, I know you look forward to running it.
Oh, yeah. It's such a blast.
Well, if that's all from you guys, that's all on this episode of the Pathfinder Report about the State of the Union in 2026 and about iAdvocate Westminster for the 250th birthday of the United States of America. If this is your first time listening to us or hearing about Project Pathfinder, you can head to projectpathfinder.net. To find out more about the programs. You can find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and of course at the Project Pathfinder HQ YouTube channel. Subscribe where you're listening to catch future episodes, and we hope to see you all back here next time. Until then, have a wonderful day.